my cousin told the Port Authority Board I was a parking attendant for boats. The captain I'd guided through Hurricane Elaine was chairing the review. Philip said it with the same confident smile he wore when he ordered wine at the yacht club. He believed it. He believed it the way a man believes a thing he has practiced saying in a mirror. My name is Claire Davenport. I'm 44 years old. I'm a civilian harbor pilot. 20 years on the water, over 3,000 commercial vessels guided through one of the most unforgiving deep-water channels on the Gulf Coast. And on a humid Tuesday morning in late August, my cousin Philip was trying to take my license so he could hand a pilotage contract to a company he owned a piece of. He had 30 days. That was the window. If the board didn't dismiss his complaint by close of business, the Coast Guard's automatic suspension kicked in and my license went on ice pending federal review. 30 days of paperwork, federal hearings, a year of legal fees I didn't have. Philip knew that. The complaint wasn't designed to win. It was designed to outlast me. I want to tell you about the man at the head of the table. Because that's the part Philip didn't know. Anders Wolf was sitting at the far end of the mahogany conference table when I walked in. Tall, gray at the temples, a leather portfolio closed in front of him. He was tapping a black pen against the wood, slow and even, watching the room before it filled. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. He'd already seen me 3 years ago, on the bridge wing of his container ship in 70-foot swells, with blood running down my right wrist into the cuff of my foul weather jacket. Philip saw a desk bureaucrat in a suit. He didn't know the director of operations had spent 20 years in the Merchant Marine. He didn't know whose ship I'd boarded the night Hurricane Elaine took the channel. He didn't know that the man he was about to perform for was the man who'd written the after-action report. I'm telling you this now because I want you to feel the gap between what Philip thought he was doing and what he was actually doing. Every time he spoke in that room, he was speaking to a witness. He just didn't know it yet. Before any of that, I sat in my truck. The Port Authority lot was already shimmering at 7:45 in the morning. Gulf Coast, late August. The humidity sat on the asphalt like a wet blanket. The kind that makes clothes stick to the skin before you've walked 20 feet, and you could smell the marine diesel coming off the container terminal a half-mile down the road. I had the engine off and the windows cracked, and I was flexing my right hand. The scar runs from my knuckles to my wrist, shiny, mottled, the kind of discoloration you get when a wound has been treated for fuel contamination instead of just sutured. In the cold mornings of January, it aches. In August, humidity, the nerve damage burns. I sat there for 11 minutes with my hand open on the steering wheel, waiting for the joint to release. I'll be honest about something. My ex-husband used to call this lot the other woman. He wasn't entirely wrong. I missed our anniversary in 2011 because a fuel tanker came in at 3 in the morning and the senior pilot was sick. I missed Christmas in 2014 because a container ship lost a stack on the approach and they needed someone who knew the inner harbor. I chose the water. I chose it again and again, and at some point my husband stopped waiting for me to come home and stood at the door instead, waiting for me to leave. The marriage ended without a fight. I didn't blame him. I'd married the channel a long time before I married him. That was the cost. I'm not going to dress it up. I flexed the hand one more time, twisted my wedding ring finger where the ring used to be, and I walked into the building. The Port Authority boardroom on the third floor has floor-to-ceiling windows that look directly out over the channel. You can see the inner harbor, the fuel terminal on the south bank, the container cranes working the north berths. You can see the channel markers if you know what you're looking at. The room itself was lemon polish and freezing dry air conditioning, the kind that hits you in the chest after you've been standing in 90% humidity. The sweat under my blazer went cold in about 3 seconds. There were 12 chairs around the mahogany table. Philip was already in his leather chair tilted back, French cuffs adjusted, talking to a commissioner I didn't know. He saw me come in, and his face did a small thing. Not a smile, something close to satisfaction. 2 seats down from him were Thomas Miller and Jack Hayes. 28 and 31, both of them. Both of them depended on Philip's vote for their pilotage contracts. Neither of them looked up when I sat down. Thomas studied his shoes. Jack stared at a water glass he wasn't drinking from. I knew what was in their signed statements. I'd seen the language. Approach angle inconsistent with claimed proficiency. That was the phrase Philip had given them to sign. It was the kind of phrase that sounded like it meant something to people who'd never put a hand on a helm. Wolf was at the head of the table, still tapping the pen, still not looking at me. I set my hands on the mahogany. My right hand went palm down without me thinking about it. The wood was cool and smelled like polish, and I felt the scar tissue press flat against the surface. Philip cleared his throat. "We're here this morning," he said, "to review the pilotage credentials and operational history of Claire Davenport in light of a Coast Guard complaint regarding falsified logbook hours and questions of navigational competence." He adjusted his cuffs. He liked the sound of his own throat clearing. "I'll begin," he began. He talked about my mother first, which was where he always started. Evelyn Davenport, first woman licensed in the Port District. Retired tugboat captain. He talked about her the way a man talks about a dead person he resents. He suggested, without saying it, that I had inherited her reputation rather than earned my own. He said the word legacy 4 times in 2 minutes. He said it like it was an accusation. Then he got to the complaint. He read sections of it aloud. Discrepancies in my logbook entries between March and June. Inconsistencies in port records. Statements from junior pilots indicating concern about my judgment on the inner harbor approach. Thomas's name, Jack's name. Both of them looked at their shoes harder. I sat very still. My right hand stayed palm down. I could feel the polish under the pad of my thumb. I want to pause here for a second. If you've ever sat in a room while someone told a story about your life and got every detail wrong on purpose, while people you'd worked with looked at the floor because they were scared of the person doing the telling, you already know what that feels like in your chest. If you think you know where this is going, keep watching. You don't. Stay with me. The next part is what I've been waiting 20 years to say. Philip leaned back. The leather creaked. He looked around the table at the other commissioners. The way a man looks at a jury, he believes he's already won. "Let's be candid," he said. "My cousin is a fine woman, hard worker. But the truth is, she's a parking attendant for boats who's coasted on her mother's name for 2 decades. The maritime community of this district deserves rigorous, accountable pilotage, not nepotism. Not a woman who was handed her father's contacts and her mother's reputation and who can't produce a clean logbook to save her life." The room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed. A commissioner I didn't know turned to me and asked, with what I think he believed was fairness, "Ms. Davenport, would you like to respond to the characterization of your hours?" I looked at him, the scar tissue pressed flat against the polished wood. I thought about every 3 a.m. call I'd taken in 20 years. "I provide navigational guidance," I said. That was all. 4 words. Philip's mouth twitched. He'd been expecting a fight. He'd built the whole performance around the assumption that I'd defend myself, that I'd raise my voice, that I'd give him something to react to. I gave him nothing. He recovered. He always recovered. He turned to Thomas Miller. "Mr. Miller, your statement notes a concern with Ms. Davenport's approach angle on the Inner Harbor on June 14th. Can you expand on that for the board?" Thomas didn't look up. He cleared his throat twice. The approach angle was inconsistent with normal procedure. She came in steeper than the standard rate of turn. I let him finish. I let the silence settle for 1 beat after he stopped. I set my hand flat on the table and looked at Thomas Miller. The standard rate of turn on the Inner Harbor approach in a loaded Panamax-class vessel at 4 knots in a flood tide is 1 degree per second over a 40-second arc. I executed at 1.1 degrees per second to compensate for a 2-knot cross-current off the South Jetty that day. The current was logged at the harbor master's station at 1400 hours. You can pull the record. Thomas didn't move. Jack swallowed hard enough that I heard it from across the table. Philip's jaw set. He didn't like that. He didn't like that at all, because it had been the wrong kind of correction. Not emotional, not defensive, just precise. The kind of precise that made the people at the table understand for the first time that there was a gap between what Philip had told them about me and what was actually sitting in the room. He pushed forward. He had to. "Whatever the technical specifics," he said, waving a hand, the way he'd seen older men wave hands. "The broader issue is one of credibility, of pattern. This board has a responsibility." The light in the room changed. It happened the way it happens on the Gulf Coast in late August. 1 second the sun was coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and laying yellow stripes across the mahogany. The next second, a wall of gray came across the channel from the southwest, and the room went dark like someone had thrown a switch. The temperature dropped. You could feel it through the glass. 10 degrees in about 90 seconds. Philip kept talking. He hadn't noticed yet. Most of the commissioners hadn't either. They were watching him, not the windows. I watched the windows. A first heavy drop hit the glass. Then a sheet. Then the squall came in sideways, and the channel turned white with chop. I saw the outbound freighter at the same moment I heard the first crack of thunder. She was northbound out of berth 7, fully loaded, just past the turn at marker 11. The pilot boat had already dropped her pilot back at the sea buoy. She was running under her own power toward open water. She wasn't tracking right. Her bow was wandering, 2 degrees to starboard, then 4. Then a slow, sickening drift that I recognized in my chest before I recognized it in my head. The VHF radio on the credenza behind Wolf crackled with the static pop of Channel 16 opening. Port Authority, this is motor vessel. Caroline Reach, we have lost steering, repeat, we have lost steering in the channel. We are drifting, we have lost steering. The voice on the other end of the radio was the second mate, and he was 26 years old, and you could hear it. The boardroom went completely silent. Philip's mouth was still open from whatever sentence he'd been in the middle of. The commissioners turned, one after another, toward the windows, toward the freighter, toward the fuel terminal, 3/4 of a mile, downwind of her bow. Philip looked at the radio. He looked at Wolf. He looked finally at me. He didn't know what to do with his hands. "Somebody call the Coast Guard," Philip said. He said it too loud. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Someone, the Coast Guard, get them on the line right now. This is a... Wolf didn't look at him. Wolf was already standing. He'd risen from his chair at the head of the table without sound, the way men who have spent 20 years on a bridge rise when something on the horizon stops being theoretical. The leather portfolio was still in front of his seat, untouched. He picked up the VHF handset from the credenza, keyed it once to confirm the channel, and set it back down on the polished mahogany. Then he looked at me. He looked at my right hand. It was resting palm down on the table, perfectly still, the way it had been resting for the last 40 minutes. The scar tissue was hidden against the wood. He didn't need to see it. He'd already seen it. He'd seen it 3 years ago in a wheelhouse with no power, when that hand had been around the spokes of a helm, and the wheelhouse glass had been streaked with horizontal rain. "Captain Davenport," he said. The room went very quiet. I don't think anyone in that boardroom had ever heard me called captain. Philip certainly hadn't. He flinched at the word the way a man flinches at a sound he can't place. "Wind is gusting 40 knots north-northeast," Wolf said. His voice was flat, operational, the voice of a man reading instruments. "What's the required rudder angle to hold her off the shoal?" My hand closed against the table. There's a thing that happens to harbor pilots when the math arrives. You don't think it. You don't reach for it. It's just there, the way the shape of your own face is there when you put your hand on it. I had run the geometry of that channel 10,000 times in my sleep. I knew the depth at marker 11 at 3/4 tide. I knew the slope of the shoal east of the channel. I knew what 40 knots of wind on a port quarter would do to a fully loaded container ship with no rudder authority. 15 degrees starboard helm if she still has steering, 10 if she's on emergency tiller, I said. But she won't hold on rudder alone. She needs Bravo on her port quarter, and Charlie made up forward, hard astern on Bravo, full ahead, dead slow on Charlie. We pivot her, we don't push her. Wolf picked up the handset and held it out to me across the table. Philip stood up. "This is highly irregular," he said. "This board has not authorized—" "Sit down, Commissioner," Wolf said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't turn his head. He said it the way a captain says it to a deckhand who has wandered somewhere he is not supposed to be. Philip sat down. I don't think he meant to. His legs just folded. I took the handset. I walked around the table to the credenza where the base unit was mounted. Because you don't run an operation like this from a chair. You stand, you face the windows, you watch the water you are talking to. I keyed the radio. Caroline Reach, this is Harbor Pilot Davenport on Port Authority Operations. Switch and answer Channel 12, do you copy? A pause, 2 seconds, 3. Pilot Davenport, Caroline Reach, switching 12. I rolled the channel. Caroline Reach, give me your heading and your rate of swing. Heading 018, swinging starboard at about 3 a minute. We have lost hydraulic pressure on the rudder. Chief is on it. We don't have a time. Drop both anchors to the water line. Do not pay out, just to the waterline, acknowledge. Both anchors to the waterline, I switched to 13 without taking my eyes off the freighter. Through the window, I could see her now in the gray rain. A long red wall sliding sideways in the channel. The fuel terminal off her starboard bow. Like a city at the end of a street she was about to walk down. Tug Bravo, Tug Charlie, Pilot Davenport, do you copy? Bravo copies, Pilot. Charlie copies. Bravo, come up on her port quarter. Make up to her stern bit. Stand by for hard astern on my mark. Charlie, come up forward port bow. Push line only. Do not make up. Stand by for full ahead. Dead slow on my mark. Acknowledge in sequence. Bravo port quarter. Stern bit. Standing by hard astern. Charlie, port bow, push line. Standing by full ahead. Dead slow. You could hear them through the radio before you could see them. The deep, low diesel of the tugs coming up the channel, the throat cough of an engine put under load. They came out of the gray on either side of her like two small dark hands cupping a falling glass. Caroline Reach, Pilot Davenport, hard right rudder, if you have any authority at all. 15 degrees, hold what you've got. Hard right 15, she's responding maybe 2 degrees. Bravo, hard astern. Charlie, full ahead, dead slow. Mark. The freighter shuddered. You could see it from the window. The whole long red length of her shuddered the way a horse shudders when a rider settles. And then her bow stopped wandering. Her bow stopped. The rate of swing went to 0. And then, slowly, the way a planet turns, she pivoted back into the channel. Bravo ease to half astern. Charlie, hold what you have. Caroline Reach, midships your rudder. Hold 010. Midships holding 010, Pilot. Hold her right there. Chief getting anywhere on that hydraulic? Chief says 2 minutes, Pilot. Take your time, Chief. We've got her. I let go of the key. The rain hit the windows in a long flat sheet, and the channel outside was the color of pewter, and the freighter sat in the middle of it like a stone in a stream, held there by 2 tugs and a piece of mathematics and a radio. Nobody in the boardroom moved. The hum of the air conditioning came back into my hearing the way sound comes back after a concussion. Underneath it, the low thrum of the container cranes, still working a mile. Down the waterfront, men who did not know that anything had happened at all. The smell of ozone was coming through the seams in the windows. Rain and hot asphalt, and the faint, sweet, terrible smell of marine diesel from a ship that had been about to open itself on a fuel pier. I set the handset back in its cradle. I turned around. Philip's face had gone a color I have only ever seen on men in shock on the deck of a ship, gray under the tan. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, the French cuffs riding up his wrists, and he was looking at me, and he was looking for a sentence. He found one. That was unauthorized interference with a Coast Guard matter, he said. You are the subject of an open licensing review. You had no standing to. Commissioner Davenport. Wolf set it to the table, flat and even. Philip kept going. No standing to commandeer Port Authority equipment in the middle of a. Commissioner Davenport. Philip stopped. Wolf was still standing at the head of the table. He had not sat down through any of it. He reached down without looking and unclasped the leather portfolio in front of his chair. He took out a document. It was heavy paper, the kind that has weight in your hand, 2 staples in the upper left corner, a Coast Guard seal embossed at the top in dry ink. He looked at Philip the way he had looked at the freighter. That parking attendant saved my crew in 70-foot swells while you were sitting in a yacht club learning how to forge Coast Guard complaints, Wolf said. He slid the document across the mahogany. It traveled the length of the table on the polish, soundless, and came to rest in front of Philip with the seal facing up. Philip didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. The cover page said what it said. After action report, Hurricane Elaine, container vessel Atlantic Crest, Master Anders R. Wolf, and under that, in the summary box, in the kind of small bold print that the Coast Guard uses for things that are not opinions, casualties 0, structural damage none. Pilotage credited, Davenport, C, Harbor Pilot, Class A. I was the master of Atlantic Crest, Wolf said. He said it to the room, not to Philip. The commissioners were leaning forward. Thomas Miller and Jack Hayes were not looking at their shoes anymore. They were looking at Wolf, and then at me, and then at the document on the table. In October 3 years ago, in the worst storm to hit this coast in 40 years, I lost my GPS, I lost my radar, I lost my depth sounder, I had 23 crew on a fully loaded container ship, and I had a harbor pilot on my bridge who climbed a Jacob's ladder onto my deck in 60-knot wind. She put her hand on my helm. A mooring cable parted on the foredeck and came across the bridge wing and opened her hand from her knuckles to her wrist. She did not let go of the helm. She brought my ship into safe anchorage by feel and by memory, because she knew the channel the way you know the inside of your own mouth. He paused. I have not forgotten what that hand looked like, he said. I recognized it when she sat down at this table. Nobody spoke. I lifted my right hand off the credenza and turned it over. I don't do that. I have not done that in a room of strangers in 20 years. The scar caught the gray light from the window, and the mottled tissue went silver where it had healed thickest along the back of the hand, and I held it up just long enough for the commissioners to see what they had been sitting across from for the last hour, and then I lowered it. I looked at Philip. You spent 6 months fabricating my logbooks, Philip, I said. You didn't ask if the man chairing your review board was in them. His mouth moved. You measure power by whose names are on the contracts, Philip. I measure it by who holds the helm when the GPS goes dark. He found a sentence. It was the wrong one. It was the sentence men reach for when they have run out of sentences. This board doesn't have the authority to bypass. This board, Wolf said, is going to do 3 things in the next 10 minutes. He sat down. He sat down the way captains sit down. He pulled the leather portfolio toward him, and he opened it to a fresh page, and he uncapped a pen, and the room rearranged itself around him in a way that had nothing to do with where the chairs were. First, he said, the complaint filed against Pilot Davenport with the United States Coast Guard is, in the formal opinion of this Port Authority, without merit and procedurally defective, and I will be filing a recommendation of dismissal with the regional office this afternoon. Second, the pilotage contract vote scheduled for the 22nd of this month is suspended pending a financial disclosure review of every commissioner on this board, beginning with Commissioner Davenport, whose holdings in Gulf Channel, pilotage services, were not disclosed in his last 3 filings, and which I will be referring to the State Ethics Commission before close of business today. He looked up. Third, he said. Philip's hands had come off the table. Commissioner Davenport's voting rights on this board are suspended, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the ethics referral. The color went out of Philip's face. It went out the way water goes out of a bilge when you pull the plug. All at once, in one downward draining motion, and what was left behind was a man in a very expensive shirt, who did not know where to put his hands. He tried his cuffs. The gesture didn't work anymore. The room had watched it work for an hour, and now the room had stopped watching it at all. 2 commissioners had already turned their chairs a 1/4 inch toward Wolf, the way bodies turn toward heat in a cold room, and Philip registered it. His chin dropped a 1/4 inch. He sat very still for a long moment, and then he gathered his folder of falsified statements, with hands that were not quite steady, and he stood up. Nobody stood with him. He walked out of the boardroom alone. The mahogany door clicked behind him, soft and final, and the air conditioning hum filled the space he had occupied for 12 years. Thomas Miller and Jack Hayes were still staring at their shoes. Wolf closed the leather portfolio. He set his pen down across the top of it, parallel to the edge, the way a man sets a tool down when the work is finished. "This hearing is adjourned," he said. "Pilot Davenport, your license is in good standing. The 30-day suspension window is closed. Welcome back to the channel." I did not say thank you. He did not want me to. He gave me a nod that lasted about half a second and was older than both of us, and then he gathered his materials and walked out the side door toward the operations floor. Because the freighter was anchored now, and there would be a report to file and a harbor master to brief, and the day was not done for him either. I sat there for a moment with my hand palm down on the mahogany. The wood was cool, the squall had broken the heat, and the boardroom AC was finally winning, and the polish smelled less like lemon now, and more like the rain, still beating on the outside of the glass. I turned my hand over. I looked at the scar in the gray light. I let it ache for a few seconds, the way I let it ache in the truck that morning, and then I picked up my blazer from the back of the chair and I walked out. The hallway was empty, the parking lot was not. Thomas Miller and Jack Hayes were standing next to the rear bumper of my truck. Thomas had his hands in his pockets. Jack was holding his own elbows, the way a kid holds himself when he's about to be told something he already knows. The asphalt was steaming. The squall had dumped half an inch of water on the lot, and the late sun was pulling it back up in pale ribbons, and the air smelled like ozone and hot diesel and the channel beyond the chain-link fence. They straightened when they saw me. "Captain Davenport," Thomas said. "Ma'am, we wanted to—" "You signed statements," I said. He stopped. "You signed statements that said I falsified hours on the November pilotage of the Bering Strait. You signed statements that said my approach angle on the Singapore tanker was 42 degrees off the channel centerline. The actual angle was 4 degrees. Both of you have access to the harbor master's logs. Both of you could have checked. Neither of you did." Jack's mouth opened. I held up my hand, the scarred one. He looked at it, and then he looked at the ground. "I'm not asking why," I said. "I know why. Philip controls the contract rotation, and you're both 2 years from your senior endorsements, and you have families. I understand the math. I'm telling you that the math doesn't matter on the water." Thomas tried again. "Captain, on the water," I said, "there's no commissioner, there's no contract. There's a ship and a channel and a tide and you. And if you've spent the last 6 months learning how to sign your name to something that isn't true, you have taught your hand a habit it will reach for when the radio goes dead and the GPS goes dark, and you are the only person between 100,000 tons of fuel and a public beach. Jack was crying. Quietly, he was trying not to. "Don't do that again," I said. "Not to me, not to anyone. You want to apologize. You apologize by being the pilot the next captain needs when the weather turns. That's the only apology this job accepts." I unlocked my truck. "Go home," I said. "Both of you. Tomorrow's a working day." I got in. I shut the door. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel until I heard their footsteps move off across the wet asphalt. And then I started the engine and I drove out of the lot. I did not go home. I drove past the harbor master's gate. The duty officer waved. I lifted a hand and kept going. I turned onto the industrial road and I drove to the old pier, sideways through dispatchers and tug captains and the woman who runs the fuel dock office, faster than any press release. By the time I reached the harbor master's gate, the duty officer already knew the complaint was dismissed, and by the time I cleared the industrial road and turned toward the old pier, the pilot boat crew was waving from across the slip. I lifted a hand. I kept driving. The phone calls came over the weeks that followed. A tug captain named Reyes called to tell me Philip's name had been quietly removed from the speakers list at the Gulf Coast Maritime Association dinner. A dispatcher I'd known for 15 years called to say the Ethics Commission had opened formal proceedings, and that Philip's holdings in Gulf Channel pilotage services were, in fact, larger than he had ever disclosed, large enough that the State Attorney General's office had asked for the file. The chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, a man who had once introduced Philip as the future of this port, stopped returning his calls. The yacht club where he kept his 38-footer sent him a letter about an unpaid slip fee that everyone in the harbor knew had been waived for him for 6 years. He did not lose his house. He did not go to prison. The consequence was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. He became a man whose phone did not ring. He kept his commissioner title on paper for another 4 months, while the ethics review wound through its hearings. And then he resigned on a Tuesday afternoon in a 1-paragraph letter that nobody printed in the trade journal. The pilotage contract went out for fresh bid. Gulf Channel Pilotage Services did not win it. I heard about most of this from the dispatcher, Marta, who has been working Channel 16 for 22 years, and who tells me port news the way other people tell their neighbors about the weather. She told me on a Thursday morning over coffee at the pilot station that Philip had been seen at a marina 2 counties over, alone, looking at a smaller boat. She told me without satisfaction. I received it the same way. A week after the hearing, a card arrived at the pilot station addressed to me in handwriting I did not recognize at first. I opened it standing at the dispatcher's counter. It was from my aunt, Philip's mother, who I had not spoken to in 11 years. 4 words. "I'm proud of you." No explanation, no request, no mention of her son. I put the card in the inside pocket of my blazer, and I kept it there for the rest of the day. And that night I put it in the drawer where I keep my mother's pilotage license and the original engraving plate from the sextant. It belonged there. I did not write back. Not yet, maybe not ever. But the drawer was the right place for it, and she had been right to send it. And she had been right to wait until the storm was over to send it. That was something. The freighter that lost steering was the Caroline Reach. outbound for Veracruz with a load of refined petroleum products. The Coast Guard investigation found that her steering gear had failed because of a hydraulic line that had been flagged for replacement 6 months earlier and had not been replaced. The captain was relieved of command. The shipping company was fined. The after-action report listed the harbor pilot who arrested the drift as C. Davenport, civilian harbor pilot, 20 years experience, intervention conducted from Port Authority Operations Center via VHF Channel 16. All souls and cargo recovered without incident. Anders Wolf signed the report. I have not seen him since the hearing. We do not need to see each other. The channel is small enough that we will eventually, and when we do, it will be a nod across a parking lot or a hand lifted from a pilot boat, and that will be enough. We are not friends. We are something older than friends. We are two people who were on the same bridge in the same storm, and that bond does not require maintenance. That night, I worked a call-out that had been on the board since the week before. A Liberian-flagged bulk carrier inbound, low tide, light wind, easy job. I climbed the Jacob's Ladder at 11:14 p.m., and the chalky, salt-crusted grip bit into my palms the way it has 3,000 times before. The moment my steel-toed boots hit the deck, the vibration of her engines translated up through the plating, through my knees, into the rest of me, and I was where I was supposed to be. The captain on the bridge was a Greek man I had piloted twice before, and he handed me a coffee without asking, and I drank it, and I brought his ship in. I came off the ladder at 2:40 in the morning. The pilot boat dropped me at the old pier because the main slip was being dredged. I walked the pier alone. The tide was out. The pilings were black and wet to the high water line, and below that the barnacles caught the dock lights and went silver. The channel beyond was flat and oil dark, and I could see the running lights of an outbound tug working its way past the breakwater. Red over green, slow, patient, the way you move when you know exactly where you are going. I had the sextant in a canvas bag over my shoulder. I had not brought it out in 2 years. It had sat in the cedar box at the foot of my bed since the 2nd anniversary of my mother's death, and I had taken it down that morning before the hearing and put it in the truck without thinking about why. I knew why now. I walked to the bollard at the end of the pier, the one she used to sit on, with a thermos of coffee and a paperback, when she was waiting for a tug crew change at 3 in the morning. The brass was cold. The bollard was cold. The whole pier was cold. The kind of cold the Gulf only gets at low tide in the smallest hours. I set the sextant down on the flat top of the bollard. The brass caught the dock light. The arc was tarnished where the air had gotten to it, and bright where her thumb had ridden it for 40 years. And the engraving had worn so smooth in 2 places that you had to know the words were there to read them. Trust the channel. I touched the engraving with my index finger. I traced it. I did not cry. I have not cried over my mother in a long time, and I did not start that night. I sighted along the arc, out across the water, the way she taught me when I was 9, lining the horizon up with the index mirror, finding the angle the old way, the way you find it when the GPS goes dark and the radar goes blind, and the only thing left is the instrument in your hand and the channel you have memorized. The angle was the same as it had always been. The channel had not moved. The channel does not move. The buoys move. The regulations move. The commissioners move. The contracts move. The channel stays where it is, and the people who know it stay with it, and the people who don't get washed out on the next tide. I stood there for a long time. The outbound tug cleared the breakwater. Another set of running lights appeared at the seaward end of the channel. Inbound, a small coaster, probably the Belize sugar boat that was due at 4. I would not be piloting her. Thomas Miller had her on the board for tonight. He would do fine. He would do better than fine if he had learned anything in the last 2 weeks, and I thought he had. I picked up the sextant. I put it back in the canvas bag. I walked back down the pier toward my truck, and the dockboards were wet under my boots, and the air smelled like diesel and salt, and the particular green smell of low tide, and my right hand ached the way it always aches in the cold, and I did not turn it palm down against anything, because there was no one to hide it from. The water doesn't care about your name. It only cares if you know the channel. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been the person in the room everyone underestimated until the lights went out and they needed you to bring the ship in, I would like to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me what work you do that the loud people in your life have never bothered to learn the name of. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, what port, what town, what stretch of road. And if you are not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that now. And ring the bell while you are there, because I have more stories like this one. And I think you are the kind of person who will want to hear them. I will see you on the next tide.